All right, let's go ahead and get started. We've got a great group here today. Thanks for joining us for Tech Tips Live. And today we will be covering more on Python. This is the second in our series. And as always, if you have questions, and we're a small group today here, and for our technical expert, you've got none other than Byron Shetler. So, you know, today is the day to ask away whatever questions you may have, but please put those in the chat. And looks like the recording is working today. Unfortunately, last month, for whatever reason, Microsoft Teams refused to record our session. So we unfortunately did not get a recording, which is unfortunate. But today's recording, I will get that posted maybe yet tomorrow, most likely early next week. All right, so yes, I'm Phil Mason. Most all of you have seen me on one of these Tech Tips Live, and Byron is here with me today. We have the great pleasure of having Byron here, and part of it is that we're busy. We've got people out in the field, and they didn't have time to help us out with Tech Tips Live. So great problem to have, and great to have you here, Byron. Thanks for joining me today.
Happy to help out.
All right. So simple agenda today. We're going to, first I'm going to review just a little bit on what we did last month in our initial Python series, and then Byron will kind of give an introduction, and then he's going to jump right into some code and show you some kind of a few tips and tricks for sub-inspections. I know John Ernst is on here today, and John sent us a question ahead of time, and I think, Byron, you're going to respond to that. Although we also talked about that John's question kind of hits a little more on next month, I'm sorry,
yeah.
The agenda next month, which is individual tests. So we'll talk about that just a little bit. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So last month, Ian Harris took us through kind of an initial review of Python, and you know, just familiarizing people. Hertzler uses IronPython, and which then accesses the C#.NET libraries, classes, etc., and allows people to extend GainSeeker in many ways. And we're going to get into more detail on that. Here are some of the common uses. Not going to read through all those. I think those of you who are on the call here today are pretty familiar with all these things that we can do with Python. And then finally, another one of those important Python uses is to connect to external systems. And that is a lot of the work we're doing these days, connecting to ERPs, MES, you name it, a wide variety of things out there. And that will be the focus of April's Tech Tips Live, the last of our Python series. So next month it will be on individual tests. April will be on connecting to external data sources, systems really. So Byron, I will shut up and take it away.
All right, thanks, Phil. Yeah, so what exactly is a sub-inspection? Well, when you create an inspection, it houses sub-inspections within that, and each sub-inspection is kind of a segment of the inspection that contains tests specific to its purpose. For example, if your inspection is for a boat, say, you might see a sub-inspection for each major area of the boat that is to be inspected. So you might have an electrical sub-inspection, upholstery, hull, motor, and so forth. And within each of these sub-inspections are tests relative to that section or subcomponent for the inspector to perform. And so, yeah, basically sub-inspections are used to break down tests into manageable sections. And typically each sub-inspection displays on a single page. We try to limit that to a single page so there isn't a lot of scrolling on the operator's part, or you know, stuff that they would have to scroll to see that they're going to probably miss. So today's use case that I came up with, just a simple use case, is an operator needs to input the shift, the machine, and their name, and then input two sets of values, and they're going to be, you know, pulling parts off a line and taking readings on those. And we'll just do keyboard entry today as well to keep it simple, although it could be gauge, that sort of thing. So with that, I think we'll hop into the demo. So I have the inspection editor list already loaded here, and I'm going to go and make a new inspection. And you should give it a name describing the process or what kind of tests you're doing. I'm going to do Tech Tips Live February 2022 for my name, just so when we post it, it's easier to track down. And I'm not going to be doing any attribute or OEE or any type of that information, just some simple SPC data collection. And my name for the first sub-inspection is going to be traceability, because I want to grab some traceability tags as we get going here. So a couple sub-inspection properties on the traceability that I want to set. This first one, it doesn't really make sense for the operator to enter a note yet, so I'm going to turn the note visible button at the bottom of the screen that we'll see later to false. And I'm going to also auto load this particular sub-inspection, so I'll set that to true because I want this one to load first when the inspection loads. That way we get in, enter the trace right away, and the operator doesn't start entering numbers without having its basic traceability set. So on this particular screen, we're going to add some traceability information. So let's go ahead and enter our shift and machine number and operator. And then for shift, we want that to be required and restrict it to our list. Same thing for machine and operator. Operators come and go. Who knows what state the operator list is in. So we'll make an entry to be required, but we're not going to restrict it to the list because we're not sure how well that operator list of names will be maintained. Okay. We're also going to have a new sub-inspection. Let's see here. And we'll call it numeric inputs. I mean, we could call it, I think we're going to do sidewall input, so we could call it sidewall, but I have my reasons for naming it this now, and I'll show you that later. So for the numeric inputs, let's go ahead and add a couple numeric inputs, and a label for that would be like, let's do sidewall 1. And we'll pick a standard for that. Shockingly, we'll pick sidewall. Okay. And then we can go ahead and copy this one just to save a little time in setting it up. Paste that. Our label will make that sidewall 2. And hopefully the operator knows what that means. We could set up a side panel with a video or some work instructions, that sort of thing, as to what they're doing. To collect these 2 values, where they're taking measurements, put up a data canvas, that sort of thing, with an image of the part, and they click on the part and see all that. But that's for a later topic. Today we're focused mainly on sub-inspections and how they interact and how you can work with them. So we'll leave some of those details for later. All right, so we have our 2 numeric inputs, and I'm going to go ahead and save and publish this and run it. So when I run sub-inspection, it already filled in some data that I was entering earlier. So it's got a shift, a machine I'm at, and my operator, and I hit submit. And now you can see here are my 2 sub-inspections, my traceability that we were just in and my numeric inputs. And I could go ahead and enter values for my numeric inputs. Not real exciting here. There's no charts, nothing else going on, and submit the data. All right. So once I submit the data, it comes back here to this screen. Now that's pretty basic functionality, and it kind of does what our use case said, which is enter traceability, enter numeric inputs, and then the operator can go back and do whatever. Taking that out on the floor, however, you always have your specification. Then you take it on the floor, put it in the operator's hands, and they say, hey, wait a minute, what about this? What about that? We do it this way. So, you know, taking this out on the floor, what kinds of things would we run into? Well, the operators, first thing they would say is we enter multiple sets of values. So they're pulling multiple parts off the line, entering multiple sets. Okay, so let's change this inspections and sub-inspections to do multiple sets of values. The operator changes during the shift. You know, sometimes operators will switch over to another line. It's a little fluid, so they might need to update the operator name during the shift. And they would also like to see the values on the chart, so that they want to see the values plotted. So what are some things we can do there? So on the numeric input sub-inspection, I clicked on that to bring up the properties for that sub-inspection. There is a chart options button, and I'm going to click on that and make a new chart option. We'll call it sidewall. And rather than picking specific standards, I'm going to pick what the numeric inputs are configured to. That way, if the standards change in the future, I don't have to worry about it, and we'll just use those. Drawing all charts in one panel. Let's go ahead and check that so that we can see both charts at the same time in one panel versus having a couple different icons and needing to switch between the charts. Okay, so next step, let's just do a basic control chart. And here, rather than having a query that looks at all the dates in the system, let's just say 24 hours ending now, just so we don't tax the database server going back looking at all the data. We'll just do a more frequent time frame. Okay, so with that done, we should be able to get some charts now. Also, the operator said, you know, the feedback we got was that they might want to change the operator more frequently than some of the other information. So let's go ahead and add a line break, and let's add the operator to this screen as well. And we'll just move it up to the top above the line break, and we'll make that entry be required. All right. Now, when the operators come in, we don't necessarily want to hop right to the operator. Most of the time, they're just going to be going straight into numeric input. So I think what we want to do is add what we call a prescript, a Python script that sets the focus to that first numeric input. So let's go ahead and do that. If I can find my mouse. Here we go. All right, so now we have a formula, and it's already set to what we call pre-mode. It runs before the sub-inspection loads. Here I've got a folder with some scripts in it, and let's just go ahead and add a new script. And we'll call it TTL, kind of the name of the inspection, and then it's in the numeric input sub-inspection, and it's a prescript. So I kind of do that naming just as a naming convention for getting my script set up. So we want to skip the operator, and way to do that is to say our current inspection and our NI. Now we need a test ID. I think the test ID might have been 3 or 4, but let's go back and rename that test ID on that numeric input to first and second. So it's real clear what we're doing here. And we just want to set the focus to that test ID. So let's go ahead and save that script and select it. Back here, our test ID, call this our first numeric input, and this one is our second numeric input. Simple enough. Okay, so I tend to also put these scripts where they execute. So if I've got a postscript, I tend to leave it at the end. A prescript, I tend to put it up top. If I have an on-change script, I'll put it next to the test that I'm most interested in where the value changes. All right, what else do we need to do here? We want to go back to this particular test. So if we go back into our Prescript, just for looping, for flow for the operators, it would be nice to, on the submit, just to repeat this script. So here we can say inspect, set our next sub-inspection to a sub-inspection name. Now I could type in numeric input here, but what if I change it later? What if I call it something else? So a more object-oriented way to do that, a safer way to do that is to put in sub-inspection list, and this is zero base. So we'll say sub-inspection list name number 1, which is currently numeric input. But if that name would change over time, this will still go to that second value. So we'll go ahead and save that and select it. Okay. So now I think if we go ahead and run it, we come into our first screen, and I don't have auto advance turned on. So let's go back here and say, back in the inspection property, we'll set auto advance to true. All right, now let's run it, submit, and it'll automatically advance to that second sub inspection. And here you can see our operators up there, so we could change that as well if we want to. And we can enter our values. There we can see our charts off to the side. And when I submit, stored the data, update the charts, and stays right in here, ready to go again. All right. So there might be a more complicated scenario. I think we've addressed all 3 issues there, but there might be a more complicated scenario where the traceability is a little more complicated, like the machine, the shift, the date. We look at that, we go out to the scheduling system and pull in some other information like a job number, lot number running, what raw materials are being used, that sort of thing. So just to give you a little feel for that, let's go ahead and put a little more control into this particular sub-inspection. So we'll add a lot number back on this first sub-inspection. Okay, and we're just going to do that with the keyboard. We're not going to pull it from other systems today, just to keep things going. So the operator, how are they going to know what the current lot number is in case that changes during the shift? So let's use the message area. That's a neat feature we added a couple versions ago to help you have some additional functionality, some additional buttons down on the bottom of the screen. So we've got lot number in there now as well. How are they going to know that it's there? So again, we'll use the message area, set up the message area for our scripting. So in our Prescript, we will say set up our message area, and we'll say inspect.message area, and our text would be say pick a new lot. Oops. And I'm going to use these /n, some special characters, which will give me a new line. So I'll give a little spacing in the value. And then I know my traceability value for my lot number is 1. I can also set the color of that area to say light green. And I actually want a script to run when the operator might click in this area. So I'll say give it a script name of TTL message area. So we'll actually need to add that TTL message area. So we'll just do a quick little script here. And what we'll do there is we'll cancel out of the current script and go back to our, just paste that in, a little cheating there. We'll cancel out of our current area and go back to the very first sub inspection. All right. So now if I run, there you can see lot numbers in there, A1, 2, 3. I hit submit. And when I come to this screen, you can see this area, the message area down here. It says pick new lot like I had typed in, and it tells me the lot is A1, 2, 3. And if I realize at some point as I'm going through and entering data during this shift that I want to change that lot number, I can go back here, click this button. It takes me back to that first inspection. I can go up, change my lot number to whatever, hit submit again, and then go back in and continue to enter data. So that's message area is just a great way to add some more functionality, some more buttons. Obviously, you can add Python script buttons within the test itself too, but I like using that message area to do that. You know, other things you can do are with the numeric inputs, like the charts, is to specify a skin. So if you want to give a little more color to the charts, have them look a little prettier, pick a chart skin. And now when I run that and go to the next screen, the charts have a little more color, a little more flair to them. All right. Obviously, you can do, like I mentioned earlier, you could do multiple icons for the charts and cycle through the charts as you go through the numeric inputs, that sort of thing. But I think you're starting to get a feel that you can control the flow, which is what I'm trying to show today. Other things you can do, you know, instead of just cycling back each time that I enter value, it's just going to cycle back to this screen. It would be to ask a question at the end here. So when they hit submit, you could ask them a question. Do you want to enter more data, or are you done? In which case, if they answer, I'm finished, then you could exit out of the system. So there's a lot of things you can do in terms of flow with the system there. Went through. One last thing I'd like to show you. I have a different inspection written with some colors, so you can modify the colors of those sub inspections buttons. We just saw those a little bit when we were running. That there you can see traceability, numeric inputs red. So in this particular one, if you peek behind the covers there's also a weight test which isn't showing up. So that one's turned invisible. And I have a script set up so that as I go through and enter my sidewall values, after I enter 3 values, it comes back here after each time. Those that are astute observers might also notice the legend down at the bottom of the screen here is gone. And in a future version, we're going to allow you to set up your own legend. And here I'm controlling the colors of those buttons, but I set it up so that after 3 values are input, that numeric input turns green, which signifies something to the user. And then now that I've entered enough data, I can start doing some weight tests, but I had to get through my initial data entry to cover that. So now I can make the weight test show up and turn that on to make it visible. And the script for that is pretty simple. Like here, I had a counter set up, and once I went through 3 times, I made the button, the weight test and sub inspection button visible, and changed the color from from red to green for the for that numeric input one. So just a quick overview of some of the functionality, flexibility you have in terms of the sub-inspections, the buttons themselves, and the flow between them all.
All right, fantastic, Byron. That's a great primer of just leading us through the whole process. You know, and if any of you have any questions, I put one or kind of prompted you there in the conversation in the chat. Feel free to enter other questions there. So Byron, what would be your tip to someone who maybe is a little scared of Python, you know, to doing some of that programming? What would you say to make them go into it with a little less trepidation, perhaps?
Sure. There are scripts in the library. You know, if I double click, I hate doing target practice, so I'm always double clicking on these Python buttons. I mean, you can click over here and click on these 3 dots, but I call that target practice. It's too hard to get to. So if you double click on a Python button, I'm showing in folder mode, like I have these categorized under this folder. But if I go back to my list mode, here's a script library that you can load. It'll go out and read in a bunch of scripts that we have set up on a web server somewhere, and you can take a peek through those and just kind of cycle through those. And you know, some of the scripts I was doing today are you can control through the property windows and change some properties to do similar things, but you don't always quite have the flexibility that you might want with just setting properties. So here's a bunch of scripts in here. You could go in and take a peek at some of those to see what other people have been doing in terms of setting up scripts.
Okay. So that whole library is in there, gives people a lot of things to kind of learn from, and a little bit could use them somewhat almost as Legos to build
Sure.
the flow through and do that kind of thing.
And I like to talk about like low code, no code, low code, and pro code. You know, no
Right.
code is you're just clicking on buttons and changing properties. Low code, you know, a lot of these scripts I wrote were just a couple of lines.
Right.
Pro code, you can get in and do some crazy things. You can even write, one of our techs was writing some C# forms. You can actually, I mean, if you're a serious programmer, you can write some C# forms and do all the Microsoft Windows forms controls and write your own dialogues that way, which is pretty powerful, going beyond some of the iron Python functionality. So you've really got multiple levels there: no code, low code, and pro code. And depending on how much you want to customize the system, you can do minimal customization with just some button clicks, or you can really customize it, which may save you a lot of money long time if you've got a bunch of operators doing the same thing over and over. And if you can save them a minute here and a minute there, you know, it might make sense to spend some extra time writing some low code or pro code to make that easier for the operators on their end.
Okay. If you've got a question for Byron, we're just about out of time here. Our next TTL is March 17, and that will be going to individual tests and how to use Python in that. Oh, Andy wants to know if you were using 9.5, Byron.
Yes, I was. Andy probably saw those folders and was drooling. Wanted to get access to those. So yeah, I was using 9.5. You know, there's also this nice little check syntax. Earlier I did a if, elif, and I forgot to put the else part in. So the check syntax caught me and said, hey, you have a problem there. So yeah, there's folders and syntax checking and other things in 9.5 that he'll like to get his hands on, I'm sure.
Yes, that is for sure. Do you want to say anything about, since, you know, John gave us a question and tuned in, do you want to say anything about his question there?
Yeah, it was really more focused towards using a barcode reader and some of the individual tests. So it didn't quite fit into this month's scenario. So John, I'll probably follow up with you actually after this and investigate that a little more and see if we can cover that a little more in next month's TTL.
Yeah, and to give everybody kind of a heads up, John was wanting to has barcode entry but then wanted to shut off the keyboard so that a field, it was forcing the operator to use the barcode and not allowing them to override it with a keyboard.
Right.
So,
and a simple way to do that is just to disable the field, do the input behind the scenes, and then populate the field through Python code, and then the operators can't actually type anything into it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. And John, thank you for posing a question when you registered. I encourage all the rest of you to do that as well. If you have something that you'd like a response to, that's very helpful for us to have some of those ahead of time. So that's awesome. March 17, we will be doing Python individual tests, more detail on that. And then in April, it will be connecting to external systems. So we will be kind of in the land of ERP and things like that. So we'll be working at that. Thank you so much all for joining us here today. Byron, thanks so much for leading us through that process. That was fantastic and really gives people that drive of kind of starting simple and then adding and enhancing it. So a great example of kind of that, like you said, that low code type of Python programming, which is very accessible for a lot of people in GainSeeker. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming to another Tech Tips Live. We'll see you in a month. Stay safe, stay well.